Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and this time I'm building the Hi-Flier XL by Estes. This is an upscale kit of the original Hi-Flier, which was a minimum diameter kit. The XL is a mid-range, mid-power rocket that flies on D's and E's and even some composite F's. So like any of these kits, we want to take a look at the inside and make sure we have all of the parts. Alright, so let's get the parts list from the instructions here. Alright, we've got balsa fins, and on my kit the fins had come loose from the stock, but that's okay. Okay, so you should have 3 of those. Alright, and then we need 2 body tubes, and there may be additional parts inside of them, like that. Okay, this is the engine mount and the nose cone. Alright, a coupler for the body tubes. And then we've got a small parts bag here that contains the centering rings, engine block, engine sleeve, launch lug, shock cord, engine clip, and parachute, as well as a spacer for mounting the shorter D engines. Theoretically, you could put a C11 in here as well, but it wouldn't fly very high. Alright, it looks like we've got everything we need. So I'm going to clear this away and we will get started. According to the instructions, our first task is to sand and shape the fins. Alright. Now, if your fins are still in the stock here, this is showing that 3 fins are in a single sheet. Mine did not come that way. If they're in a single sheet, it's actually easier to sand them all when they're in the sheet like this. If yours came like mine did, where they're already separated into separate pieces, go ahead and take them out of the supporting balsa surrounding them. Okay, so on 2 of them, they're just kind of falling apart here. Well, we've got a crack in that fin, maybe. Yeah, it looks like we've got a little crack right here where that coarse grain is. We'll just need to be careful with that. I think we can just fix that with some super glue later. Alright, so 2 of the fins are already out. For the third one, take your hobby knife and go around. Alright, and if all yours are still intact within the balsa stock, you'll need to do this with all of them. But just cut through the little nubs that are still holding it in place. Okay. The remaining balsa here you can either put into your scrap pile if you have one, or you can discard it. Alright, so next what we want to do is sand the surfaces. And I recommend using about 150 grit sandpaper initially, and just sand with the grain. And do this to all of the fins. So that's kind of the minimum fin treatment there. Then you'll also need to sand the root edge here. So the longest edge of this is the root edge, and then this is the leading edge. So for the root edge, just sand off the remains of those nubbins. We want this to be flat and square. And again, do that for each of them. Okay. Now in the instructions here, it shows that you can put them all together and do the same thing. So if you've got a big piece of sandpaper handy, you can go ahead and just drag it across sandpaper like that. I don't have a big sheet with me at the moment, as I tend to cut mine into little ones that fit my sanding block. Okay. And then go ahead, you can also do it like this. Alright, on the other edges, again, go ahead and sand off those little nubs. Alright, and then the instructions recommend rounding the leading edge here, and then leaving the rest of them square. Now the advantage to that is that gives you the strongest fins with a fair amount of streamlining to it. Now if you want the best performance, you can either round or taper the leading edge and then taper the trailing edges as well. Okay. For mine, I'm just going to go with rounding the leading edge here. And so again, I'm going to start with some 220 grit sandpaper, not 220, 150 grit sandpaper here. And first I'm just going to knock down the corner edges here. So I'm taking this edge and just making them flatter to begin with. Alright, and then I can start rounding them over. Now since these are so long, you really need to be careful about doing this evenly. Alright, and frequently come and check it in cross section here so that you can see that you're doing it evenly. Alright, and then you've got this dark area where the laser cutter cut the fins out, and you'll be approaching this toward the middle. And so this can also act as a guide for you, because as you keep rounding over, you're going to keep doing that until you can't see any more of the brown anymore. Now right now, this is more angle than rounding, but as we get closer, then what I'm going to start doing is just kind of rotating my wrist as I go through here, and this is going to impart more of a rounded shape to it. Okay, also, if I'm doing it at this angle, I can also just change my angle a little bit each time, whichever is more comfortable for you. Okay, and again, frequently come and check the cross section. So this is rounding inward now, but it's a long, thick fin, so it's going to take a little while. If you want, you can start this with 100 grit and then move to 150 to do the final smoothing of it. Alright, so here I'm getting a little bit lopsided. I've got more of a curvature here than I do on this side. So I need to change my angle a little bit more. So that's pretty good for that one fin. And this actually took a lot longer than it looked on the videos. I've sped it up. I'm going to do the same thing to the other two fins off camera and then come back. I've finished sanding and shaping the fins, and I gave them all a final sanding with 220 grit sandpaper just to help smooth things out. Now you notice here, this fin is much lighter in color and much different in grain, and you can't tell through the video, but it's a whole lot less dense than the other two are. In fact, I'm going to bring a balance out here. So if we check these, 11.8 grams, 10.7 grams, and then the really light one is only 3 grams. Okay, this will affect the flight of the rocket, not severely, but it will tend to veer off in one direction away from the lighter fin here. And so, depending on your comfort level and availability of supplies, you can either ignore this. If you have a good stock of balsa, you could cut yourself out another fin that's more close in density to your other two. What I'm going to do here is use some super glue simply to add some mass to this. So first I'm going to put down some wax paper. You could also use sheet plastic, like polyethylene plastic for this. We just want something that super glue won't stick to here. Alright, and here we want to use the runniest super glue that you have. Now, as a warning ahead of time, this super glue is only 2 grams in the entire tube, and so it's not going to make an enormous difference here, but it will help add to it. And what I'm going to do is just kind of spread this around here. I'm going to use that entire tube. Alright, and now with a gloved finger, I'm going to smear that around. And some of this is judgment call. We want this to stay on there and soak into the wood as much as we can, but we don't want it to dry in lumps. I do not recommend using a super glue accelerator with this. Okay, and now I'm going to take some tissues. You can also use a paper towel for this. And I'm just going to wipe it dry. Okay. Make sure you do this in a well-ventilated area, because that much super glue is going to produce a lot of fumes. Alright, same way, I'm just going to spread this all over the fin. Again, using my gloved hand here, I'm going to spread this around and let that soak in for just a little bit. Right, this one I use gloves on both hands. Okay, now it's trying to stick to my paper here. Work better. Now, this is just making a mess now. Okay, I'm actually not too worried about that anyway, because we're going to sand this later. Once again, I'm going to remove the excess. Alright, now I'm just going to set this aside to finish drying. And then when it's completely dry, we'll go ahead and sand it down. Now again, it's not going to give us the full mass of the other two fins, but it will make it a stronger fin and make it so it's not quite so misbalanced across the axis of the rocket. The next part in the instructions shows marking the tube for the fins, and that uses this tube marking guide here on the front. Now the problem is that also is where the installation of the engine mount is going to be, and so we don't want to ruin this quite yet. So what I've done is made a photocopy here, and it clipped off the bottom of my shock cord mount there, but that's okay. So here I can freely cut this out. You can use either a hobby knife or scissors. Alright, and then just pick one of the two body tubes, and it will become the aft body tube. And in fact, I'm going to mark aft inside one of the ends there. Alright, and this is simply going to wrap around, and you overlay the hashed area there, line up the two tick marks, and then apply some masking tape. Now I actually like the masking tape to come down here and stick onto the body tube, and that will help keep it from moving as we are marking it. I'm going to do the same thing up here. Alright, and now I'm just going to make a little tick mark on either side with a pencil. Alright, now this is the launch lug line. And I'm actually going to write LL over here so I remember that's it. Alright. Now we can just gently remove the masking tape. Okay, and now go ahead and draw lines all the way down. Okay, so this is showing 5 inches here. That's kind of the minimum. I am just going to draw lines all the way down this body tube because it'll give me a better chance of aligning the fins. And you can do this on a door frame, but since door frames won't fit under the camera, you can also use a tube marking guide like this one that Estes sells as well. Okay, so here I just line up my tick marks here. Just draw a line all the way down. Okay. So now if we apply the fin, it actually goes up almost the entire length of the tube there. Okay, so the other thing we can do, alright, is take a piece of sandpaper. It doesn't really matter what type. And here I'm just going to lightly sand along the line. And this removes the gloss from the covering paper and will give a better gluing surface. Right now for our launch lug line, we don't want to go all the way up. And we're going to need to find where the launch lug is going to be mounted. Alright, so that's going to show 5 inches. That's the 5-inch measurement I saw earlier was for the launch lug. So here I'm just going to take my ruler, okay, measure 5 inches, and on my launch lug line I'm just going to do about 1 inch or so here above that mark there. Okay, coming back to our instructions, our next job is to build the motor mount, and then they attach the fins first and then install the motor mount. I'm going to do that in reverse, as I just have less chance of breaking a fin that way. So we're going to go ahead and find the motor mount parts here. So here we're going to take the motor mount tube, and as I showed in the unpacking there, this may be hiding in one of the body tubes. Alright, we have a clip, our engine rings, sleeve, this will hold the clip in place, engine block, and then this is a spacer. You don't need this for building, you'll need this for launching if you're using 70mm long motors like the C11 and the D12. For now I'm just going to put this back in the package. Okay, so first of all we're going to make a couple of marks on the body tube. So starting from the aft end, and here again I'm going to write aft inside one end so that I don't get my orientation mixed up. Okay, so we need a mark at 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from the aft end. Alright, and make it fairly large because the next mark is going to be at 3.25 or 8.3 centimeters. And the engine clip is going to run all the way down here. And so if you just have a little mark right in line with this one, you'll hide it. Next you're going to take a hobby knife and cut about a 3mm slit, 1/8 of an inch at that mark. Alright, and then the right angle part of the clip is just going to pop right into there. Okay, looks like I need a little bit bigger slit. There we go. Alright, and then the thrust ring here is going to be mounted right inside the top like this. Now when you get this in, it's going to have a tendency to push down on one side because on the opposite side it's hitting the top of the clip there. So just try and keep it even when we get it in there. Alright, you can use white glue or wood glue for this. Okay, and just run a bead of glue right inside. You want it nice and uniform, but not so heavy that it's going to get all drippy down inside of it. Okay, and you can use a finger or an applicator here to smooth that around. And then go ahead and put that in. And as I said, try and keep it even, don't let it mush down on one side. Alright. Next we have the sleeve here, and that's going to fit over, and then we'll stop at that line. And what this will do is keep the engine clip from moving side to side. So here, again, we'll go ahead and put in some glue. Now I'm going to start with about the same width there so that I'm pushing the entire sleeve through glue. Again, we don't want this dripping, so make a nice even film of glue there. And then we're just going to push through the glue till we hit that mark again. And then any excess up here, we'll just smooth that in. Don't make a really thick fillet, or you may run into problems with the centering rings there. And this really isn't bearing a lot of pressure. It's just holding that clip in place. Okay, next we have the two centering rings here, and these will probably just pop right out. If they're really sticking, you take your hobby knife and cut through the little nubs there. Alright, and these appear to be identical, so it doesn't matter which one goes on which end of the motor mount. Okay. The other material you can just discard. I actually tend to keep these little guys for making bulkheads for other models. Alright, so one of these is simply going to go over the clip where that notch is. Alright, now if you're having trouble getting this on because of those little nubbins, you can use sandpaper to get rid of them. Okay, mine went on finally there. Alright, and here we're going to put this right up against that sleeve. And here, again, we don't want dripping glue, but a fairly good amount here because the ring does hold a lot of pressure. Okay, so just push that all the way up as far as you can get it there. It should go right up onto the ring. Alright, and that's forming a nice fillet on the back. Go ahead and smooth that around. And then you can add another one here on the other side. I guess that's actually the back, the other side's the forward end. Alright, and if you get a little bit of glue up there on the clip, don't worry about it. Okay, the forward ring is just going to go right over the forward end here and just right at the engine clip there. So you should just be able to see the engine clip out of the forward side. Okay, and I'm going to move that down just a little bit first. Add some glue. Again, I'll smooth that around for an even film. And then I'll push it back forward through the glue. Alright, and it's wanting to grab, so you're going to do this quickly. Okay. Try and get it as square as possible. If it's off a little bit, it's not a big deal. Alright, once more, go ahead and fill in with that remaining glue, and then we're going to put another fillet on the aft edge, or aft side here. Okay, now we need to let this dry completely before we go and put it into the body tube. While the glue is drying on the engine mount, I'm going to come back to the fin here that we super glued, and I'm just going to sand that now with some 220 grit sandpaper. Now, one of the other things that this is going to do is fill in a lot of the grain. So in that way it kind of acts like a sanding sealer as well. Okay. Now for this model I am not going to use a sanding sealer on the fins. I'm going to use them the way they are. If you would like to learn how to use sanding sealer, check out my video on the original Hi-Flier. In that one I do use sanding sealer on the fins. Alright, now if we take our balance here, let's see if we gained much mass. Alright, we gained about 1.5 grams. Okay. So we're not going to be able to put a huge amount of mass on the fins this way. This does, though, make it a bit stiffer and more robust, and having the really light, not very dense wood like this was to start with does also make it weaker. Alright, so along our long axis it's still going to be a little bit unbalanced, but probably not enough to make a lot of difference. Now while we're still waiting for the motor mount to dry, I want to look ahead here to the shock cord. Okay, so this model uses the standard Estes shock cord mount with an elastic shock cord, alright, where you sandwich the shock cord into a mount like this, and then you glue that to the inside of the upper body tube. And you can do that, alright. I'm sure the model will work just fine the way it's shown here. But I've kind of gotten away from elastic shock cords simply because they deteriorate fairly quickly over time. And so I am going to replace the elastic shock cord with Kevlar here. Now Kevlar is very heat resistant, it's very decay resistant, but it's not very elastic, so you have to use a lot of it. And kind of the rule of thumb for very long rockets is at least 3 times the rocket's length. Alright, it says its length is 31 inches. Now I'm going to actually use 4 times the length because this is going to get mounted way down inside the rocket. In many cases it gets mounted to the engine mount itself. But another way I found, if you've got rockets that have a coupler in between them, is that you can run the Kevlar through the coupler and use that as a mount as well. Okay, now you have to give it quite a bit of room. So if we come back a little bit here, alright, so after we get the fins on, it shows us putting the coupler in. And one of the things we can do right now is go ahead and find the middle of the coupler. Alright, so it's 3 inches there, so at the middle it's going to be 1.5. Alright, and so that means what I want to do is at half of that, or roughly 3/4 of an inch, alright, so it's not quite, about 3.8 centimeters there. I'm going to come down to 2 centimeters, so right there. Alright, and I'm going to put a little hole there using my hobby knife. And then I'm just going to kind of eyeball this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Alright, but roughly across from there, so that was 2 centimeters there, so I'm going to look down there, this is approximately the other side. Alright, so that's about 2 centimeters there. Alright, put a hole in that part. Yeah, come on. And you want the hole big enough that it's easy to thread the Kevlar through. Alright, now for this rocket I am using 100-pound test, which is made for a working load of 20 pounds, which this will not exceed. Okay, and so I said I'm going to want 31 inches times 4, it's 120 inches. 12 feet, or excuse me, 10 feet. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right, go ahead and cut that off there. Okay, now I'm going to find the two ends here, and I'm going to apply a little bit of super glue to them to keep them from unraveling. Okay, and then I'm just going to wipe off the excess right away. Alright, so that not only keeps them from fraying, but it makes them stiff. And I'm just going to take a little bit of alcohol here, just make a little drop there and put that in. Alcohol is basically what most super glue accelerators are. Okay, so that's going to make it nice and stiff very quickly. And so now I'm going to take one of these, starting from the outside. I'm going to feed that through the hole. Alright, and then through the other side again. Alright, pass that up. Alright, and we'll pull this so we've just got that one in there. Okay, and now pull this down as far as you can while still being able to work with it. And now what we're going to do is just tie a fisherman's knot or water knot into the whole thing here. So we'll have one little free end and then the rest of the shock cord there. We're just going to cinch that down. Okay, so that should give us a pretty strong knot there. And then just to make sure, we'll put a little dab of super glue right on the knot so that it does not come loose. Alright, so this will cause a little bit of bulging of the body tube. So if you don't want your body tube bulging, then use a different shock cord. Use the one that came with it. What this will do now is we'll put in the aft end as we would normally, and then we're going to feed the entire shock cord back down through it. And this is all dry fitting right now. I haven't glued anything. But we're going to pull that all the way down. Alright, and then pull that taut so that it looks like that. Okay, and then the other body tube will go on like this, and the Kevlar there is going to get trapped in between the body tubes. Now you have to keep tension on this while you do it. Alright, in fact you can just take this off for now. But while you keep tension on that shock cord there, we'll move the body tube into place. And down to that mark. Alright, so you can see a little bit of bulging there. But we'll glue this into place. And then once you've got that done, we'll put the entire shock cord back up through where it belongs. But this will give a really good, strong anchor. Not quite as good as anchoring it around a motor mount, but it's pretty close. I've done this with several rockets and never had a failure with it. Okay, so what we'll do here is I'm going to go ahead and mount this to the top or the forward section first, and then after we get the fins done, we'll go ahead and put the whole thing together. Alright, I'm going to put the glue in here just a little bit beyond the edge so that I've got a little time to wiggle the coupler into place before the glue tries to grab it. And that is a danger. You want to do this as quickly as possible so that the glue doesn't grab and cause it so you can't get it in all the way. Alright, so I'm going to keep this taut. Okay, so it's grabbed on there. I'm not quite halfway in, but that's definitely sturdy in there. I'm going to reach up inside and smooth the glue around. Okay, let's see if we can see inside there now. Right, so you just barely see it going across there. So now I'm going to take the other end of the shock cord and feed that in, making sure I don't wrap it around the part of the shock cord that goes across there. Okay. Alright, so now I'm just going to let this glue in an upright position like that. You can barely see that down there. Okay, but that way I don't have the chance of gluing the shock cord to the side of the body tube. Okay, the glue on my motor mount is dry enough that we can work with it. And the first thing I'm going to do is just dry fit it in here to make sure we don't have anything grabbing. Alright, needs to go on the aft end of the rocket there. Alright, so this should fit in fairly smoothly. And once it's glued in, the two tubes should be flush here with just the clip hanging out. Alright, now I am going to just lightly sand around here to get those little nubs down, because they can cause catching when they hit the glue and swell up a little bit. So that goes in really easily. Personally, I prefer to have my engine clip on the same side as my launch lug so it stays out of the way when it's on the launch pad. Okay, and now what we're going to do here, okay, so this is showing a ring of glue up inside there. Now to know how far you need to take your motor mount, and I use a cotton applicator for this, and so I'm going to go to here. I'm going to put the end of the applicator right below the ring there, and I'll put my thumbnail here right flush with the motor mount. All right, now I'm just going to put a big dollop of glue on there. I'm going to stick this up inside and then come up against the side of the body tube using my thumbnail as a stop and just rotate that around inside. It looks like I need a little more. I want to make sure you've got a good even bead all the way around. Okay. Alright, now I'm going to slide this in, but not into that glue yet. And now I'm going to add some more glue right around inside the aft end here. And the aft centering ring will then go through that ring of glue. And you can just kind of move this out of the way as you need to. Alright, so now I'm going to realign my launch clip, or the motor clip, with the launch lug line, and I'm just going to push that in. And then use a ruler or other flat edge here to make sure it is flush. Okay, and that's actually grabbing fairly well. Now if you look there, you can see some gaps along the outside edge. And so for that, you can just go ahead and take your applicator here again and just put some down inside where you need it. Try not to be too sloppy about it, but you're not going to see it down in there. And as long as it's not interfering with things, you can do what you need to do. Okay. Alright, now if I do have globs up there, I'm just going to kind of smooth them in here. Alright, that looks pretty good. So I'll set this aside to dry. And then once this is dry, we should be about ready to put the fins on. Okay, the motor mount is dry enough that we can work on the rest of the rocket without it moving. So we're going to start attaching the fins here. And my method is a little bit different than you find in the instructions. What I like to do is get a very thin, even bead of glue along the root edge here. Alright, and use your finger to even that out. We want this thin and not drippy at all. If you get too much here, it takes longer to dry, and you're more likely to have a fin move when you don't want it to. Alright, and then I'm going to apply this to one of the fin lines. Alright, push it down to make contact, and then I'll pull it back up again, and I'm going to let this dry for about 30 seconds. 30 seconds have passed, and now I'm going to put the fin right back where it was. And what has happened in that 30 seconds, the glue dried a little bit and got tacky, and this makes it stickier. Okay, so the aft edge of the fin should be flush with the body tube. Alright, and then just check this from behind, making sure it is parallel with the rocket. And that's part of the reason I extend the lines all the way up, is it gives me a sight line. And then it should be perpendicular to the surface of the rocket. Alright, let this dry for about 10 minutes at least, longer if you're using white glue. And if you want to use a fin alignment guide with this, now's the time to apply that. So I'm going to let this dry, and I'll apply the other two fins in the same fashion, and when we get back, we'll put the launch lug on. The fins are dry, and so my next task is to apply the launch lug, which is going to go on this line, and this is where we sanded it earlier. Okay. We'll use the same glue that we used for the fins. And in the same manner, you don't want a great big glob of glue on here, just a nice even bead. And you really don't have to wait for this to get tacky because it's not got a lot of leverage on the item itself. Okay, so just put that on there, and then you can sight down it. Make sure it aligns with the line and the rocket tube itself. Move that just a little bit. Okay, and then we'll let that dry, and when we come back, we'll put on the fillets. The glue on the launch lug is now dry, and at this time I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to join the two body tubes together, and so for that we're simply going to take our glue, whichever one you've been using, and put a bead of glue right inside the lower body tube here. Alright, go ahead and even that out with a finger. Okay, and then this is simply going to go straight in. There's nothing to orient here. So just push that in, give it a little twist as you do. If you want, you can orient the spirals with each other, but it really doesn't make any difference. So that part's done. And then the other thing we need to do is apply all of the fillets. So here again, go ahead and use your white glue or wood glue. And I like to do facing sides at a time. So I'm just going to run a bead down each length here. Okay, and it's a good idea to have a paper towel or a rag or some tissues handy here for wiping gluey fingers. Alright, and then just take your finger here and fill those in smoothly. And it doesn't really make any difference whether you start at the base and go up or come at the top and go down. If you have a little bit of gap showing there like I just had, then go toward that. And then just keep going all the way around the rocket with both the fins and the launch lug. Okay, and then just let this dry in a horizontal position. Later on, after it's dry, then go ahead and check it. Sometimes little bubbles appear, or you may have little gaps that you missed, things like that. But it's better to let this dry and then apply another layer than to try and apply a really thick fillet all at once. You can also apply additional fillet material using things like modeling putty or wood filler, because this is what's providing the strength. And then if you just want more contouring or better aerodynamics, use one of those other things that are easier to smooth in without bubbles. So I'm going to let this dry and we'll come back and check it later on. My fillets are dry and the rocket is in the process of being primed for painting. So I'm going to come to the nose cone here, and really the main thing we have to do is remove this flash from the eyelet. And so sometimes it pops out really easily like that, sometimes you have to cut it loose. Just be careful that you don't cut through the eyelet there. Okay, now this particular nose cone is made in 2 halves, so there is a seam on each side. It's not very prominent, but if you want to smooth it out just a little bit, I suggest using some 220 or 320 grit sandpaper. You can sand that seam on both sides. Okay, and then go ahead and sand the entire nose so it's uniformly sanded. Now you don't have to do this. If you don't mind the seam, you can just use the nose as is. Although giving it a light sanding does help the paint stick better. Alright, and then you just need to wipe this down and it's ready to be primed and painted as well. Here I have the rocket painted, and as you can see I went with the yellow and silver pattern rather than the traditional black and red. And now I'm going to go ahead and install the shock cord and recovery system. Some people like to do it ahead of time. Either one is fine. Okay, so remember earlier on we put a Kevlar shock cord into this. Alright, if you're using the rubber shock cord, that's fine too. In either case, we're going to go ahead and tie this onto the nose cone. So just do a couple of half hitches or a double knot here. Okay, and you want a little bit of a free end hanging out here, but not so much that it can get caught up against the shoulder of the nose cone and between that and the body tube. And then once you've got that in place, if you're using Kevlar, go ahead and put just a little drop of super glue on the knot. If you're using rubber, do the same thing, but use white glue or wood glue. Super glue will dissolve it. For the parachute, go ahead and unfold this. flatten it out. Okay, and try not to tangle up the shroud lines here, which they are doing pretty readily all by themselves. Alright, now this is a pretty large parachute. If you're on a windy day or something like that, you might want to use a slightly smaller one. This is an 18-inch. Okay, and that brings up the next point. So in the instructions it shows just simply tying this onto the nose cone. Now if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I don't like to do that. Instead, I'm going to use a snap swivel like this. You can get these at sporting goods stores, department stores, some hardware stores, but they're going to allow me to easily change out the parachute or just remove it for storage. Okay, they come in different sizes and colors. The size doesn't make a whole lot of difference. This isn't a really heavy rocket, so anything that'll fit the nose cone is fine. And that's what you need to look at here. So the snap part here needs to be big enough that it can go over the nose cone eyelet and still move freely when it's closed. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is just gather up each of the shroud lines on one finger here. Okay, and then I'm going to grab the center of the parachute with my other hand. Okay, and now I'm just going to move these back and forth here until they are all in line. Alright, it looks like one of these is a little bit bigger than the others. Okay, so if we come back here and look at it, alright, that one that just came loose looks like about an inch, inch and a half longer than the other ones. Okay, so we've got a couple of things you can do here. You can ignore it. It'll just mean you may have a spinning parachute. Or you can tie a knot here. So I'm going to take that excess material and I'm just going to tie that into a water knot or an overhand loop knot. Okay, and for now I'm just going to leave it like that and come back and recheck the relative lengths of all of the loops there. Okay, that one's still a little bit loose. Oh, actually that's another one that's a little bit loose. Okay, but that difference is not as great. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and take this one here, it has the knot in it. I'm going to put just a little bit of glue on there, white glue or wood glue. Okay, and I'm just going to work that into the knot there. And then now I can cut off the excess there. And don't get right next to the knot, leave a couple of millimeters. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is regather all of those shroud lines. Okay, now if your shroud lines were all the proper length to begin with, you don't have to do all this stuff. Alright, so now all those corners should be at about the same level. Okay, and I said that one shroud line's still a little bit loose, but that's alright. Alright, now you're going to gather up all these loops. You're going to thread those through the swivel end of the snap swivel. Alright, and keep a firm hold on with your other hand so that those don't change their relative lengths as we're doing this. Alright, then you're going to take the entire snap swivel, pass that through the loop, alright, and then pull the loops down and pull the whole thing taut. Okay, come back, check your parachute again. That's acceptable. Alright, if it's not, you can loosen that again, reposition it, and try again. And then go ahead and put a little dab of glue on the knot to lock that in place. Okay, so now when we're ready to go, we simply clip this on to the nose cone and then just fold the parachute like you would normally for launch prep. Alright, now just to keep it out of the way, I'm going to set the parachute aside, and then we'll also temporarily put the shock cord back down inside the body tube here, and then we will be ready to do the decals. This model rocket uses all water slide decals, and so I've got a little basin here of room temperature water, and I'm going to start with the Hi-Flier logo there. Okay, and you can refer back to the packaging here. So they've got the Hi-Flier shown here, kind of adjacent to one of the fins. If you look in the instructions, it actually shows the Hi-Flier in between two fins there, and so that's kind of up to you. Okay, and then we have these wedges, and they are intended to go on the fins. Now in my rocket I did not paint the fins a different color. You can if you like, but these should still go on without any problem there. Okay, so first of all we'll just cut this out, and I'm just realizing as I'm doing this I'm probably going to need a larger basin of water because this is a long decal. Now if you want, you can cut this into sections and apply the decals individually. Okay, that means you have to line them all up separately too. Okay, but you could say cut off the little arrows here and here, and then put them on in kind of the same order, or you could just put them somewhere else. You don't have to follow the package layout. And yes, I am going to need a bigger basin. Well, my bigger basin seems to have gone missing. What I can do here is just put this on edge like that and let it soak up the water. And this may take about 20 seconds or so. Okay, and then just check it periodically, see if it's loosening. And there it goes. Okay, so I've just pushed off a little bit of the decal there. And I'm going to align mine with the fin that is opposite the launch lug. So you'll be able, this will be sticking out at you on the launch pad. Alright, and so now I'm holding down with my thumb the edge of that decal. Here I'm just going to slowly pull the paper out from under it. That looks pretty straight for the first time there. Alright, I am happy with that. If you need to move it, you can gently pull on it, as long as there's still water present there. Alright, and when you have it where you want it, take a tissue and just squeegee out the excess water. Alright, I got a little bit of a break there. Try and cover that back up. Okay. Now for the fin decals, you'll probably want to cut these relatively close to the edges. I'm going to start by just cutting one of them away here. Okay, now before I put this in the water, we need to map out where we want these. Now these are intended to go along this part here. Okay, and they're in two different styles here. Okay, so you got to make sure that you got the right one. Okay, and it won't fit on the other side, so if I come over here, it actually runs up onto the body too. So just be aware of that. These are in left and right formats. Alright, now go ahead and put that in the water again. Alright, now this one, the decal was crinkled on the sheet, and it is trying to tear. So I'm going to have to be really careful when I put this on. Okay, so this needs to go right here. Alright, now that is breaking away, but I think we'll be able to fix it here. Alright, so I'm just going to slide this around like that. Okay, and then once again you want to squeegee this out, and I'm going to be really careful here at that break. So that instead of trying to squeegee it, I'm more blotting it. I'm holding it in place there. I've lost a little piece of one there. Alright, now the other ones, as far as I can tell, are intact, so they should be easier to do than this one. I completed putting the rest of the decals on. And so this is the entire rocket. It's rather long. Now, as one more step for added protection, you can wait for the decals to fully dry. I recommend at least overnight. And then you can overcoat those with an acrylic clear coat. Now, I do recommend acrylic because it's less likely to cause crinkling of either the decals or the paint. But with that, this rocket is finished. I hope you had a great time building it with me. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.